Gabe is now my favorite person in the universe. Oh, that's awesome. Hi, I'm Brad. Hi, Lindsay. And I got to be here, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, and hang out and that sort of thing. I'm trying to think. I get distracted because I normally sit in a room. I'm a middle school teacher, and I work with students with behavioral issues. So normally at this point in giving some sort of lecture or teaching at like 4 hours ago at school, somebody would have thrown a shoe at me. So thank you. This is way better already, and totally unfamiliar. When I say that, that's not a joke. Like that actually happens. Like that's just it's kind of a fun part of my world. And if this wasn't being videoed, I would tell you other stories, and it would be awesome. But if you want to see pictures of, no, I can't do that. That's not legal. And so anyway, thank y'all for letting me come and hang out again. And so yeah, I'm Brad. I've been working at Book Cliff Middle School for about the last year. I don't know, maybe the 10 or 12 years before that. My wife and I lived in Tennessee, and then we moved here and we worked at a couple of different churches here in the Valley, and then in a little town right outside of Nashville. I hear y'all are thinking about it. Oh, awesome. And so, so that's kind of me. My wife, I thought she might come tonight. This way I kind of get credit. Tonight is our 9th wedding, or today is our 9th wedding anniversary. So that way I get credit because this is on video, and now she knows that I love her. Video, I love you, and that sort of thing. No matter how many times I don't take out the garbage, I love you. And so tonight, I don't know, it's interesting when Gabe on the video said, we talked about Chick-fil-A, and I was like, oh, I wonder what we talked about. Like, I wonder which thing he's talking about that we talked about, because we talked about like 3 things. So I'm not totally sure which one he thought would be good. So I hope this is it. If not, I might not get to tell you the good one, because he might not invite me back. And so this conversation started maybe about a year ago with my buddy David, and he came into Grand Junction for about a week or 2 just to hang out. He helped me out with some stuff at the church I was working at, and then we just got maybe a week to hang out together and just kind of play, and we went skiing and rock climbing, all this kind of stuff. And over the course of this kind of 8, 10, 14 days, whatever it was, we started talking about this idea of forgiveness. And that's kind of what we want to talk about tonight. And I want to preface it with, I think everyone's theology is always a working document. What I mean by that is like the thing that I thought was really, really true about the universe and God and faith and spirituality when I was 22, I think that version of myself is kind of an idiot now, right? And then like the 22-year-old version of myself thought that the 8-year-old version of myself was silly and trite. And so I just say all that to kind of contextualize it, that I may come back in a year and be like, nope, that's not right. I changed my mind, which would be great, because then it would give me another whole thing to talk about and that sort of stuff. So, and I also say that because I think kind of the thing that I want to talk about, I don't know if it's not like popular, like I'm trying to be like cutting edge or, ironically hipster or something like that, nothing like that, but just that space of like, it's just a new thought for me, and everything that I'm seeing doesn't echo the thing that I'm starting to think about. And so it's kind of hard to kind of bridge those 2 things, my real life every day, and then all the stuff that I'm kind of pondering on. So my buddy David and I were talking, and can we show the first slide? Just because I think this one's funny. Because I think it's really nice when X-Men hug Sabretooth. There's really nothing to do with anything there. I just thought it was funny as I was searching Google. And so I don't really have an avenue to share these things except for here. And can we do the next slide? Because this is where my buddy David and I started talking, and we started thinking, I go through Facebook, I see all this stuff on social media, and it's really interesting because what I'm reading and hearing and seeing and all this kind of stuff are things like this. I'm trying to see which one I can see better. It says, forgive others not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. How many of us have heard something like that? Okay, I was like, you need to be on Facebook more. That's really what the universe needs, right? Is more social media. Can we see the other one? Forgiveness doesn't excuse their actions. Forgiveness stops their actions from destroying your heart That is so sweet. I kind of want to throw up a little bit. Do we have another one? You practice forgiveness for 2 reasons. And this one's a little better, I think. It's just the order is interesting. To let others know that you no longer wish to be in a state of hostility with them and to free yourself from the self-defeating energy of resentment. And, while you're at it, send love in some form to those who feel have wronged you and notice how much better you feel. Now, is there another one? I can't actually remember. Yeah, when you forgive, you are free. Actually, one of my favorite pastors and speakers and writers, not unfortunately, but I was kind of bummed because I kind of knew that we were going to talk about this, and he came out with this like 4 or 5 day podcast, like 30 minutes a day. And it said similar things. It was essentially like, when you forgive others, you set the prisoner free and find out that the prisoner was actually you. And so my buddy David and I are kind of checking out Facebook, looking at social media, Googling these things just to see like what we can find. And most of the stuff are like the things we just showed. And we started talking and we said, well, this is really interesting because forgiveness, I always thought when I heard about it, forgiveness, especially in church, right? It was about, I had done something wrong, and somebody else, namely in church, Jesus, right, was letting me off the hook. But Facebook tells me something very different, right? It says, when I forgive, I'm off the hook. And it was just such an interesting thing and such an interesting, like, kind of, idea. And it's one that, I didn't like Google search those things for more than about 2 minutes a couple of days ago. So it wasn't as though like I spent a lot of time, I came up with an idea and then I wanted to prove it right. I typed in forgiveness posters in Google, and then I went to images, and those are on page 1. And there's a bunch more like them. They're just smaller, and so Jared couldn't use them, or they would be all blurry and pixelated, and I couldn't read them. And so there are tons and tons and tons of them. And so this is not just me like or David coming up with some like crazy idea of like this is how the world understands forgiveness. This is, we Googled it. It's official, right? What other way can I take data and like do an empirical analysis of the issue? If not through Google. That's what they do. And so we go through this process, and David says, that's so interesting because forgiveness is an inherently selfless act, right? At its core, like what we do when we forgive somebody, when we let somebody off the hook, it's an empirically selfless act, or it should be. And yet we have a tendency to switch it around and say, well, I do want to feel better, so I should probably forgive them. And it's so innocuous that we have this idea that my feeling better is why I need to forgive somebody. And so here's my working theology that may be different in a week, right? But my thesis, I guess, tonight would be that's bull crap, period, right? And here's why I think that. Because when we take an act that's by its very nature selfless, and I turn it into something about me, about my freedom, about my feeling better, about me being at peace, I make the selfless act selfish. And when I make the selfish act selfish, do I not rob it of its grace and its love and its beauty? Because now it can no longer be, if Lindsay does me wrong, then I forgive her because I need to feel better, not because Lindsay needs to be let off the hook, right? And we kind of just live inundated. I would say do it right now. Pull out your phone and Google search forgiveness posters. You don't even have to listen to me. You can see it. It's there. Just like scroll through, and there's thousands of them. Well, you need to feel better, so you need to forgive. And here's the thing. I think that sometimes we forgive and we do feel better, right? I don't think that is an untrue statement. I think that there are times when my wife and I, in the last 9 years of our being married, have gotten in a fight or an argument or disagreed, and I come up and she forgives me, she feels better. And when I have forgiven her, I do feel better. And so I'm not suggesting that that is an untrue statement. I'm suggesting that this is not an absolutely true statement. But the idea of forgiving means that the person who's wronged you now is let off the hook. It means that whatever they have done to offend, to upset, to disrupt, whatever it is that you have in that relational dynamic that you have with them, is now okay. Like, not perfect, right? I mean, and so can we read the Bible verse? Because I want to make this really short and sweet because I like listening to the music more than I like listening to me. This is from Luke 23. And this is right at crucifixion. So, I mean, I bet most of us at some point have heard this story and that sort of stuff. So I don't want to like act like this is so unfamiliar, but so it's a little bit of a chunk of a passage, but hopefully y'all will stick with it. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children, for the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with Jesus, with him, to be executed. And when they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. And here's the part. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." So Jesus himself, and this is where David and I started really like pondering this thought, and this is for us, which gives some meat to kind of the things that we're thinking and wrestling with. Jesus himself being crucified, at least in the midst in our story, and he says, "Father, forgive them." They don't get it, right? Like, they don't know what they're doing, and they have no idea the ramifications of what they're doing. And on the happy side, they have no idea the ramifications of what they're doing, right? And yet in our Facebook, Google image, the forgiveness poster world, the story would read, and Jesus was raised up on a cross between 2 criminals, one on his left, one on his right. And one mocked him and said, "If you're king of the Jews, save yourself. If you're the long-awaited Messiah, save us all." And Jesus would have said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And God would have taken Jesus off the cross, right? Because if forgiving people lets me off the hook, if it makes me feel better, that makes total sense, doesn't it? Like, the pain should go away. It should be easy from there on. I forgave her. I forgave him. I can't believe they did that to me. And yet, I bet most of us in some real sense have had some sort of interaction with family or with friends or with the guy who cut you off here and you're still angry about it in the roundabout. And one time on a totally separate note, I went around the roundabout and this guy cut me off and I kind of honked and then he followed me all the way home. It was weird. Right out here. I was like, do we know each other? I was hoping it was like somebody I knew and they were just messing with me, but I'm not sure. And then I was like, I'm going to be on the news, and not in a good way for like winning a peace prize or anything, just in a murder in Junction, news at 11. And so right, like if Jesus, if the Facebook tells us that we're going to feel better once we forgive, we're going to be redeemed and we're going to feel at peace. And yet Jesus says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And what happens? It actually gets worse before it gets better. it actually hurts more before it hurts less. Like death actually comes before resurrection, doesn't it? Because we haven't even gotten to death yet. Like it's still coming. It still sucks. It still hurts, literally, figuratively, bearing the sin of the weight of the world, all this kind of stuff. Not your average Friday afternoon, right? And yet we kind of treat forgiveness like, I need to feel better. I want to feel better. I should forgive them. And yet at the same time, it doesn't work that way, does it? Because I bet most of us, if we're really, really honest with ourselves, and maybe, I'm just guessing that most of us, maybe not most of us, but some of us have had more serious things to happen. Some of us have had like a really pretty okay life. And the guy who cut you off in the roundabout is the worst thing that's ever happened. If you are the guy who chased me home, we should talk afterwards. I want to know why. And so we get to this point. And it's just this weird space because I want Facebook to be right. I want to be able to forgive somebody and feel so much better about the world and the universe and my faith and my spirituality. And yet, it doesn't work like that. I can forgive somebody, and let's just be really frank here, and it's okay if y'all don't invite me back. I'm still pretty pissed. I'm still pretty upset. I'm still pretty angry. It doesn't mean that I haven't let them off the hook, but it does mean that just like Jesus, when he comes after resurrection, right? He's forgiven everybody. He's lived it, died it, resurrected it, and he comes in. Nobody believes it's really him. And what does he do? He says, check out the scars, right? Like it doesn't go away. And I know we're talking about like a literal thing with Jesus and a figurative thing with our own stuff, but I think it still works here. I think that, my sister-in-law and my wife and her two daughters, not my wife's two daughters, my sister-in-law's two daughters, went to Disney World last week. And Terry flew in from here, and Shauna and her two girls flew in from Nashville, where they live. And they hung out for the week. And my sister-in-law just got divorced maybe about a year ago. She found out that her husband, of maybe, 15-ish years, had been, how do we say it nicely and in church, had so much love to give that he gave it to someone else. Apparently, Shauna had enough. And so Shauna goes through this process, right? Like they kind of go through counseling. He goes to counseling, but he's not fully present in the midst of the counseling. And then eventually he just says, I'm kind of done here. Peace out, right? And kind of washes his hands of all of that. And now he, I suppose, and his lady friend are now happy together. Shauna, a year later, and I think this to be true, can forgive Wes. Right? Like she can move, and I heard somebody once say, like, we don't get over things, we get through things, right? Like we don't just like kind of gloss over it, like we kind of trudge through. And there's no flying in real life. Like there's only like wading through muck. And we just try and wade with grace. And I bet in the midst of Shauna having forgiven Wes. I'm right. I mean, there's not much. I mean, we could probably think of a handful of things that are worse than that. But and I know, like it's church, not all sins are equal. But as a citizen of the United States of America, there are some sins that are worse. And so, right? And so we would probably say that there are some things worse than what happened to my sister-in-law. And yet, she forgives. And then she goes to bed at night, right? And then she actually gets into the bed where she and her now ex-husband shared for the last 15 years. And then her kids have some issue and they're mad at her because she doesn't have, she doesn't have the finances to do what they want to do. But dad, who they don't live with, certainly has the finances. And this is not necessarily a negative commentary on Wes, although it certainly could be. But what it is to say that Shauna can fully forgive Wes, and it can still hurt like nobody's business, right? Like it doesn't actually go away sometimes. And I think that's the point. Like we want to gloss over it. We want to get over stuff and not through stuff. And yet the gospel says, tough. Like you can forgive it all, and death can come, but right, like but joy comes in the morning, but resurrection. Tony Campolo says something like, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming," and there's this space of letting go of this idea, because I remember when David and I would talk about it, he had some stuff that happened. He was like, I really thought that was true. And then I felt like I forgave that person. And I didn't feel better. And that was kind of this whole birth of maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe the selfless act of forgiving somebody is just that, right? It doesn't do anything. Not that it doesn't do, but it doesn't always do something for you. It lets that person off the hook. That person no longer has a debt to pay. And I'm really fascinated by the way that economic language is used to describe relational dynamics. So I think it's really interesting how people say things like, this is kind of a side note. I'm really interested in the way, particularly in evangelicalism, how people say things like, I want to invest in them, except everywhere else invest means I want a return on my investment. So it's really hard to love somebody if you expect something from them in return. But anyway, so I just think those things are fascinating. And so when we forgive, we take away this debt, we say you don't owe me anything else, more economic language, right? And we take away, we eliminate the transactional nature of that relationship and turn it into one that's loving and life-giving and grace-filled, because now I've let somebody off the hook and they actually deserve not to be let off the hook. Because you and I, right? You and I actually have done things that we shouldn't be let off the hook for. And our husbands and wives and friends and family have all said, it's okay. And it's gonna be okay, right? I remember when I was in, this is kind of embarrassing. When I was in college, somewhere in there, you may not know this, but credit cards are dangerous. If you didn't know that, there you go. If you take nothing away from the rest of this, that's good advice. And when I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in this small little house in Central Florida, and the more I tell stories about growing up, the more kind of redneck I realized we were, even though I kind of fought against that. But then I was like, yeah, we took a shopping buggy and tied it up to the 84 or 74 Ford LTD and drove around and played rodeo. Whoever could stay in the cart for 8 seconds, lived, and I'm just like, man, bless your heart. And so kind of just lived in this little town, and I totally forgot where I was going. And totally lived there, played there, did all this kind of stuff, and in the midst of my own parents' divorce, and they were shown grace by people. And then in the midst of my own, a few years later, credit card debacle, because they just give them to you. The minute you turn 18, it's like magic. You open the mailbox, and you're like, it's for me? Somebody loves me, right? And they're like, I think I will sign up. And it's really nice to be wanted. And maybe I had some insecurity issues at 18, I don't know. And so ended up in, I could have bought a Kia, let's say it like that. And like a fancy one. And so with an auxiliary port and everything, and power windows. And so I got in this crazy amount of debt, and I remember my mom, she was not thrilled because I made $6 an hour working at a grocery store. There's probably no slow and steady there to help pay that off. And I remember we had this little oak tree in our front yard, and my mom said, let me see what I can do. And I remember I walked outside and I climbed up the oak tree and I hopped onto the roof and I sat there and I did the thing that we've all done, right? Dear God, if you'll just get me out of this, I will love you, I will serve you, I will praise your name forever. And right, and then my mom, whatever happened, whatever magic happened on the inside of the house while I was sitting on the roof, she came out and she looked up and she was like, I think it's going to be okay, right? And we'll figure it out. And there was this moment, she wasn't ever like, I forgive you. And if she was, she's kind of I think she and I are kind of, I don't know, brash is the right word, but she would have been like, I forgive you, you idiot, right? And I love you, you dummy. And it was that moment, and it was that kind of thing where I knew, sitting on the roof, that mom had forgiven me, right? And the thing with, and this is a literal debt, right? And the thing with that did not mean that mom was thrilled with me for the next 4 years, right? It didn't mean that she was excited that now chunks of her paycheck were going to have to go to keep her idiot son from getting in trouble with people, whoever they were, right? She talked to him, I didn't. And it didn't mean that that she was okay with what I did. But she sat there at the bottom, and by the tree, as I was on the roof, and she said, "I think it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out." And then it actually was okay, and it was partly okay because I knew that I had been forgiven. Like I knew that like what I had done wasn't okay, that I didn't want to live in that kind of space anymore. And I knew that what I had done was now going to drastically alter the way that she lived her own life, right? She forgave me, and it still got worse before it got better, right? Because my working 25 hours a week at the public supermarket as a bag boy wasn't gonna cut the Kia that I had bought and didn't own, right? And so it was a lot of Chick-fil-A. Don't judge me. And so, right, and I bet we all had these kinds of stories, and maybe they're not as expensive as a Kia, and maybe they're not even like financially related. Maybe you did something wrong. I know for me, when I got married, or when I got engaged, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I started to reflect. My wife and I met, and about 6 weeks later, we got engaged. And thank goodness that worked. Dodged that bullet. And I love you, honey. All right. And so we met, we got engaged, and the things that she had to confess and the things that I had to confess were really, really hard. And then like we forgave each other, and it was still hard. And then it got me thinking about other girls that I had dated, and I realized like what a terrible like boyfriend, dater, whatever I was when I was in high school and early college. I was awful. Like I treated people terribly. And I remember one girl in particular, and all I had, I mean, to contextualize how old I am and how long ago this was, the only point of contact I had for this girl was her AOL email address. Right? And so I just got on and I emailed her AOL email address. And I said, "Amanda, I am so sorry I treated you the way that I did. I'm so sorry that I treated you as though you were a commodity and something to be consumed." And not like in a weird way, just in that like wanting the attention way, right? Like, and let's just be, we're all kind of like that. And I don't, and I remember I clicked send, and I kind of felt better. But what really felt good was a year later, because who uses AOL hardly anymore? And I got an email back from her email at AOL.com, and I thought, holy moly. And she said, "You know what? It's okay. I learned a lot and I grew a lot. And she actually said, I haven't checked this email in years. I was just doing it to clean it out. And I happened to see your email, and you're forgiven," right? And that doesn't mean, and it's really interesting because with Amanda, like I was awful. I know the kind of damage I did. And so I know to be forgiven by that, even before she actually sent the email, right? Wasn't easy for her. Like it's never easy. And I wish like we wouldn't play it off like it is like, well, why don't you just forgive them and be done? And I know that like we're good church going folks, so we wouldn't say that exactly, but we kind of live like that. We're like, wait, you haven't forgiven her yet? What are you doing? You want to be like, I'm playing Xbox, you idiot. What do you think? I'm just struggling through. Like it's called life, and this sucks, and I don't want to, right? And yet we can be free from that. But way more importantly, I don't know what happened to Amanda, right? I got the email, and that was the end of it. But I know that my being free of that was life-giving. She has no idea how life-giving it was. And so maybe our goal now, and I know some cell groups meet after this, or maybe at least one, and hopefully y'all will talk about some of this stuff. is we start to ponder on what does it actually look like to forgive? What does it actually look like to take something that's inherently and by its very nature, it is a selfless act, and keep it that way, and not make it about so I can be at peace, and not make it about so I can feel good, and not so I found out the person that was freed was me, but that the person that was freed is the person you feel angry at right now. The person that was freed is actually your parents when they divorced when you were 13. And the person who was freed is because you got into crazy amounts of debt and didn't know what to do about it. And the person, right? And on and on and on. The person who was free, was the one who got the DUI when they were 20 and just were idiots, right? And so all this kind of stuff. And so maybe the thing is, may we become those people who are more than willing to go through the muck instead of just getting over something. May we be the people who are actually striving to be selfless in the way that we forgive, not in hopes that we feel better about it. And that would be, it's awesome when that stuff happens, but in hopes that we are able to extend love and grace and forgiveness to people who actually don't deserve it. And here's the reality, none of us actually deserve it. And Jesus sits on a cross for us and says, forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what this is actually, how this is changing the universe that you created. But forgive them anyway. And it may get better, and it may actually get worse. And I think at some point and in some way, there is always resurrection. I think in some way that resurrection isn't necessarily something that happened. And I do think it was something that happened, but I also think that it's something that happens, right? We had these like little aftershocks of the original kind of thing. We had these like spaces where we see our friends and they were really messed up 4, 5, 8, 10 years ago. And then you look at them now and you're like, man, how could you not think that God is at work in the world when I see them, right? Or I mean, like nature is easy. I see a sunset, and that's pretty. I love Jesus. And you see how God is actually redeeming things, and there's like new heavens and new earth actually being created right here, and in such a way that like we don't have, a lot of us, at least I grew up in a culture that was really excited to get to heaven, but nobody was actually excited to bring heaven to earth. And so maybe it's like that little space where we actually get to bring a little bit of heaven to earth, like in such a way maybe that, like Jesus says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Whatever's happening in heaven, I want it to happen here. And I think that forgiving people in that selfless kind of way is part of how the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth actually collide with one another in such a way that you can't tell where one begins and the other ends. And we're going to pray, and I think more music is coming. Is that right? Okay, and then we'll worship. Dear God, thanks for letting us be here. We just ask that we're people who are figuring out what it looks like to forgive well, not because anybody else deserves it, not because we deserve forgiveness, but because we want to be people who are acting like you. We want to be people who acknowledge that sometimes it gets harder before it gets better. Sometimes we want to be people that know that there are scars that come along with it, sometimes literal, sometimes figurative, but nonetheless, they are visible reminders of the pain and visible reminders of the redemption. May we be people who are reminded that resurrection can happen and happen and happen, and that you are God who is bursting forth new life right in the middle of this old, broken kind of life. We thank you. We love you. Never enough, but we hope to try. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.